1866, and this particular year, the 150th anniversary of that seminal event in VMI history. I think of it. I think of that battle and your ancestors' role in that battle as being it was a proving ground. It wasn't just a battleground for VMI. It was a proving ground for the concept of the citizen soldier, which was really pretty new for Virginia at that time. VMI had only been around for 25 years. Before the Battle of Newmarket, it was the proof of the education. After May the 15th, 1864, Newmarket has been the standard by which subsequent generations have been expected to rise. And your ancestor, Cadet Harvie, was a part of that experience, that transition from what VMI was before to what it has become in the last 150 years. The professional standards require me to put on these white gloves, but you, inasmuch as your DNA runs through this sword, you don't have to put on white gloves when you touch it, so don't worry about that. I wanted to tell you something about this sword, because you've told me a lot about Cadet James Harvie and the generations that came after him. It's kind of interesting that we have this photograph in the collection now that shows that link between then and now. 150 years sounds like a long time, but there are people in this room that have connection with young Cadet Harvie, who was there on a rain-soaked wheat field on the afternoon. It was a Sunday on May the 15th, 1864. Now, when and where did Cadet Harvie come into possession with this sword? That is something I don't suppose we ever asked him. Did you? You weren't quite old enough to ask him, I guess. No. There. That's not what it's not the conversation you were having. This is a model 1860 cavalry officers, United States Army, I should say, cavalry officer sword. So how does it end up in the hands of a young cadet in the Shenandoah Valley, Virginia? This sword gets beat into its configuration here in Providence, Rhode Island, at the Providence Tool Company that started making swords for the Union cause early in the war. This particular sword is actually dated 1862. It's a standard. Thousands of these things were made. Every cavalryman wanted one of these. This particular one has been sharpened beyond its natural original configuration. It was a serious weapon. It was a cut and thrust weapon. It wasn't just for show and decoration. When officers wear swords today, it's really just a symbol of position. But when this sword was made, it was meant to be used, and most likely has been used on fields of battle. 1862, it comes into existence. By 1864, it must be here in the Shenandoah Valley. It is not something that Cadet Harvie would have had issued to him. In fact, he's a private at the Battle of Newmarket. Company D, which means when the cadets got close to the Bushong house there on the center of the battlefield, A and B company had the house was literally right in front of them. A and B company had to go to the east side. C and D company had to go to the west side. And then once around the house, they restructured their lines and reformed. At that point, Private Harvie was in his company waiting for orders. And the order he gets is to lay down. Everybody lay down on the ground. In the southern side of a small little orchard that Jacob Bushong had started there in when he first started his family there in 1818. It was the pride of his life. Next to his family, that orchard was a very important thing. That's where the cadets were told, just get down on the ground to protect yourselves. There wasn't trenches, there wasn't walls, bulwarks. It was just the ground. And they were receiving musket fire from the Union artillery line, about 200 yards, 2 football fields distance in front of them. Artillery fire bursting around them. And right in front of it, no one expected Cadet Harvie to win victory from the Union Army. In fact, no one expected him to even be in the battle. They were to be held as reserves. reserves that certainly General Breckinridge, the Confederate commander, didn't want to exercise. So the cadets are there just waiting, hopefully waiting for nothing. The battle's going to be over, and then we get to go home back to VMI. On the other side of that small little orchard, there's a split rail fence that separates the orchard from a wheat field. The main Confederate line, the veterans, 51st Virginia, the 62nd Virginia, that's where they were. Just maybe 20 yards, 25 yards in front of the cadets that are in relative shelter, safety. And suddenly, a line is blasted into the very center of the Confederate line. That line had to be restored, or the Confederates would, there's no question, they would lose, because the Union then would charge across that wheat field and destroy the Confederate line from the left and right. One of General Breckinridge's subordinates says, "Sir, now's the time to send the cadets in. They're our reserves, we've got to plug that hole." And Breckinridge first refuses, because he doesn't know what to expect of Cadet Harvie. That's a schoolboy from VMI. He's never been on a battlefield before. Suppose he runs. Suppose he is cowardice. Suppose he forgets how to use his rifle. I don't know that I want to send a letter home to his family. I regret to inform you that Cadet Harvie, etc. So he refuses the order, but he's reminded by his staff that either we send the cadets in or we vacate the field. And then Breckinridge says, "Send the cadets in, and may God forgive me." And then the cadets rise out of that position. They were there about 30 minutes receiving incoming fire, and I can tell you, if you're an infantryman, that is the worst place for you. It's pretty demoralizing to be receiving incoming fire, and there's nothing you can do about it except wait to hope you survive. But now they have the chance. The orders are for them to rise. Cadet Harvie rises with the rest of the 257 cadets to his left and right, and they move forward through the orchard to repair that broken line. But they're stepping over the bodies of men of the 52nd and 61st Virginia as they do so. Those men that originally had been part of that line are now the dead and wounded that the cadets are having, that are stepping around as they make their way up to that line. That in itself took courage. And they get to that split rail fence, and they restore the Confederate line just as a Union regiment was getting ready to break right through. They first repulse that 34th Massachusetts Regiment and send it back to the Union line. And about that time, Cadet Harvie and the rest of the cadets to his left and right realized now is our opportunity. And in the moment of, maybe it was youthful ignorance, maybe it was because they weren't seasoned veterans, maybe because they didn't know what lay on the other side of the field, but they get up and they spearhead the infantry charge, assault off across that battlefield. And they get to the other side, and by then the Union commander is saying, maybe it's time for us to leave. Franz Sigel gives the command for his line to withdraw from the battlefield. And it is the last Confederate victory in the Shenandoah Valley. It preserves the breadbasket of the Confederacy for one more season here in the western part of Virginia. And then General Breckinridge rides by, and he acknowledges Cadet Harvie. You know, well done, Virginians, well done, men. They were no longer schoolboys. They had been changed by that experience. It took probably 30 minutes of their young lives. Now, for some of them, it took the rest of their life, because there were 10 cadets that did not survive. Their names will be called later this afternoon. But when we think of those cadets, we also think of some 600 VMI alumni since that time who have gone into battle, protecting the nation, defending democracy, knowing Cadet Harvie's story. That's where it began for them. If you're a VMI graduate, this is the standard that has been set for you. You, more than many VMI graduates, have a personal relationship, a personal connection with that story. One of the cadets also said something, one of Harvie's classmates, he said, you know, I was terrified. When we got to that split rail fence, I knew that I wouldn't survive. Every Union musket is pointed right at me. But when we stepped over that fence, it was his words were, all concerns of individuality left me. It was the core forward. It was everybody accomplishing something that not an individual could accomplish alone. And so ended the day of May the 15th, 150 years ago, 2 p.m. in the afternoon. At this very hour, the cadets are moving up around the Bush Hong House, getting ready to take their place, getting that unfortunate order for them to just lay here and for the next half an hour or so, and we'll see what happens, taking that Confederate fire. So, how then does Cadet Harvie receive this sword? There are several scenarios, educated guesses. Did he acquire it actually on the field after the battle? Was it something dropped by a Union cavalryman who no longer had need for it? But Harvie, knowing that the war wasn't over for him, he had just begun. Maybe this was something he's going to use, a souvenir of that day. Cadet Harvie is going to leave the Institute, actually, and stay in the field for the remainder of the war. He's going to retire, he's going to surrender, I should say, more appropriately, down in North Carolina with a horse artillery unit. He would have had need for the sword during that those months of his service to the last days of the Confederacy. Maybe it was at that time. But there's something about this Union sword that also suggests Confederate usage. And those things, to me, are indicated here. That's not how that was made. That was originally cast in an upright vertical position, but it's been bent over. Union cavalrymen did not do that. They weren't allowed to do that. That was disfiguring your weapon. But the Confederates would do that because it gave them more leverage. See, they could put their thumb up there, and it gave them more leverage for slashing. So they tended to do that. And when you see that, that's a suggestion that this would have had a Confederate usage. Also, the way that the particular rib of the handguard is bent down in this way, that's something that we see. There's also, even the scabbard suggests usage. Some of these dents and dings in here were probably put in by your ancestors, but some of them were probably put in by Cadet Harvie, particularly the ones that are cross from each other. And the Confederates, again, would do that sort of thing to reduce the rattling of the blade inside of the scabbard, to make it a little more stealthy. All of those things indicate that, no question, Cadet Harvie would have had need and use for this piece. A direct link for us today to the moment that young people made the difference between victory and defeat, when he demonstrated, along with his fellow classmates, brother rats, corps members at VMI, that they had abilities beyond what anyone would have expected of them. Cadet Harvie has given the reasons of why VMI alumni are literally around the world pause on this afternoon every year on May the 15th and remember those young men who were tried on that wheat field 150 years ago. When the descendants of those young men come back and are part of the program, it kind of reconsecrates it for us, if you will. You're the living embodiment of that moment, and that we share with you, with your family, in our history. Sir, would you like to say a few words, or someone on behalf of the family would like to?